Welcome to the GSMC Pets Podcast, the show that caters to pet lovers of all kinds. We'll talk about pets on social media, pets doing amazing things, and how to take care of the pets in your life. Whether your pet is a dog, a cat, a llama, hamster, reptile, or something more exotic, you'll find educational and entertaining information on the GSMC Pets Podcast.
Hello, and thanks once again for tuning in to the GSMC Pets Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex Flezes. Now, here on the podcast, whenever I have my shows, I love to educate and to really talk about the real-world applications, relations of fictional characters, or to sort of talk about how interesting certain creatures are. But today I feel like being a little lighter on that subject, and I thought, what's better than sitting back and spending time with your best buddies and maybe watching a good movie or just honestly having a good time? But since a lot of us are, confined to a certain space and time at this moment, as of recording this, of course, I figure what could be better than that than maybe thinking about best buddies that are animals that happen to be in movies and TV. So that's really what I want to talk about today, are just some of the best buddies you might see in television or movies, best animal buddies, maybe some on social media as well, because even animals can have best buds, and sometimes even animals can teach us about friendship more than people could. And that's really what I wanted to start. And I definitely think one of the best examples of best buddy animals has to be from the Disney movie, The Fox and the Hound. While there are a lot of other Disney movies that have really great buddies in them, best friends, that happen to be animals, whether they're anthropomorphized or not, I definitely think that the movie The Fox and the Hound is one of the best examples of best buddies. And don't be surprised if you hear a few more Disney movies on this list, because who else does friendships and animals better than Disney? But for those of you who may not know, in the Disney movie Fox and the Hound is about a fox and a hound who are best friends. But that's a little simple. You see, in the movie, a young fox kit, I believe they're called, is unfortunately separated from its mother due to a hunter. In the process, the kit is sort of watched over by a few other animals until it gets sort of brought to a old woman who lives out in the woods. This woman takes in the fox kit and names him Todd because he's just a little toddler. Very cute, very lovely story, and she raises Todd as a child, her little friend, her pet. In the process, another elderly person who lives in the wild, a hunter, at the same time of already having a hunting dog, decides to get another hunting dog to raise, this dog being Copper. Copper is a little bloodhound. Now, of course, a hunter will get a animal like a bloodhound to sort of help track down prey that it will want to hunt. So usually it could be tracking down prey after it's been hunted, tracking down prey in the middle of the hunt. That's usually what they would be used for. Now, as a little puppy, Copper meets a little fox named Todd, and they become best friends immediately when they don't realize that they're supposed to be enemies. It's very adorable. It's very sweet. And unfortunately, halfway through, they sort of go their separate ways, and they grow up. And as they grow up, they're not supposed to be friends anymore. They're both bigger and older, but they still want to be friends, but they can't because that's not the worlds they live in. It's supposed to be a hunter and prey situation. However, the idea is that they're able to stay friends, that they're able to break the barriers of the sort of roles they're supposed to play, and it definitely is a really great story about friendship. It's definitely a very emotional, very sweet movie as well. But the idea of a fox and a hound being friends is honestly fascinating, and in fact, isn't even that far-fetched, seeing as foxes aren't that far off from the canine family. Some people believe foxes actually are a little more related to the cats family, but actually, foxes are a little more related to the canine family. It's a very interesting fact. They're like sort of a nice little in-between, but they definitely do have a little more resemblance to a wolf or a canine. So it's kind of interesting that they're not too far off regardless. And an interesting tip about bloodhounds is that they are known to have some of the most incredible smelling senses for a canine, which is why hunters tend to use them very frequently. However, I think most days people actually use either German Shepherds, or on occasion they might use even greyhounds nowadays. I don't know if bloodhounds are exclusively the hunting dog anymore. And I'm not sure if this is 100%, but the famous dog from the video game Duck Hunt, I believe, was also a bloodhound dog, or a bloodhound mix, which also makes sense. But this is honestly a really sweet movie, and I think if you have the ability to watch it, I think it's on certain streaming services, so you should have the ability to watch it. I would definitely say if you want a good animal movie about friendship and about, being a good friend, this is definitely one of the best animal movies of friendship. And it always got me to cry a little bit when I was a kid as well. And that's sort of one thing about animals as well. I've seen several animals that should be enemies, that should be at odds with each other, but sometimes they just kind of live copacetically because they're like, we have no reason to fight. We're both getting fed. We're both doing good. So why do I need to hunt you? You're doing just fine. And I don't think it's that animals actually want to just have to hunt. It's just sort of their means of survival, sometimes when we have animals, they have wild animals especially, they don't hunt for personal reasons. They only hunt for survival. So if it wasn't for that case, a lot of animals probably would live very well together. Like for one instance, there's this one video of a bunch of lionesses, and I think actually a large male lion as well, who got scared by a small groundhog, or I think it was even a badger, because they were standing on that animal's sort of den, and the animal just kind of pops out of the ground and starts screaming at them. And they're all confused. They're not hunting this animal. They're not attacking it. They're just, what the heck is this thing? What are you doing? And it's just yelling at them. There's no reason to fight or hunt because there was no reason. They were fine. It was just all confusion. And it was very, very funny, actually, how that sort of thing can happen. Because animals aren't completely based off of vendettas or prejudices very often. Now, there are actually a couple situations where animals do have stuff like that, specifically in the case of the mongoose and the cobra, but that is a very, very special story that I'll have to go on to one day. But Fox and the Hound is a really good movie if you like animals and you love a story of friendship, you love a story of creatures from a different, species, a different world, coming together and just being good friends. That's sort of the best, most fun you can have most days. And I definitely think that Todd and Copper are a shining example of friends. Animals, honestly, can be some of the best examples of friends, and how a relationship can be built off of trust. And those two had a really great relationship and a really great story that I completely recommend if you haven't seen it, or maybe you just haven't seen it in a long time and you want to have some feels, especially while you're stuck inside for any long period of time. Go check out The Fox and the Hound. Go enjoy this really sweet movie about a lovely fox, a cute little hound dog, and just sort of the fun adventures they go on from adolescence to adulthood. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. It's great. It's honestly a really, really good movie. And it's really well animated as well. Besides loving animals, I also love animation, and this movie is definitely a good mix of both of those two things. But with that being said, we're going to go on a quick little break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about more best buddies in TV, best animal buddies, and just how great buddies they are and all the reasons why you should go check them out in this slow time in our lives. Of course, when we come back, we're also going to talk about some other well-known buddies and maybe a few other animals named Buddy as well. We'll find out soon enough, but please stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
We're back. Thanks so much for sticking around today. Today we're talking about best animal buddies in film and television. And we have quite a few to talk about. We just recently talked about the lovely duo of Todd and Copper from the movie Fox and the Hound. So now we're going to move on to another well-known duo, and honestly, one of probably the most emotional animal movies you've probably ever seen, because let's face it, I'm pretty sure everyone has seen this, and that would be Wilbur and Charlotte from Charlotte's Web. Now, you might ask, are they really a duo? Is that really a fair choice? I think it's absolutely a fair choice for multiple reasons. And for those of you who may not know about the movie, let me give you a quick recap. So, a farmer buys a small baby pig that he is eventually going to, dispose of to make for some delicious foods. However, the farmer's daughter says that it's wrong and that they should keep the pig, and then the farmer says, okay, but you have to raise it, and she does, and the pig gets bigger. However, the father's saying that he's going to need to be, we're going to have to do something about him soon. He's getting too big. And as Wilbur, the pig, grows bigger, and they're ready to sort of take care of him, they decide Wilbur starts speaking with a friendly spider. friendly spider by the name of Charlotte. Now, obviously, being an animated movie, a lot of times animals can speak. But Wilbur speaks with Charlotte, and they become friends. And she decides to help Wilbur to keep him from getting breakfastified. So she spins a web and puts words into it, and they makes the people think that he really is some pig, that he's special, and that they should keep him around. So because of that, they sort of stay friends, and she helps him, watches over him, and she's kind of like his guardian angel. It's very, very sweet, as well as he starts to learn more about the world, and then he starts to become just a very special small celebrity as well. However, later on into the movie, Charlotte reveals that she's now not going to last for much longer because spiders have a very short lifespan, and this makes Wilbur very sad. Although his life is saved, he can't save Charlotte's life, and then he watches over her eggs, and then eventually they hatch, and then Wilbur just sort of thinks about everything, and it's a very, very sweet movie. It's also pretty interesting from a biological standpoint, but I'll get back to that in a second. But the friendship made between two completely different species, in complete innocence and in an attempt to save life, is honestly a really sweet story. It's a good movie, it's a good story, and it's really sweet friendship because, some people become friends out of necessity, while some people become friends out of just they're compatible. And this definitely becomes a friendship out of necessity and a friendship out of, compassion. It's such a sweet story, and it's just a fun story at the same time. It's also very, very sad if you haven't seen it in a while. Thinking about some of the stuff in that movie, just kind of like, especially for a child, thinking about some heavy themes in that movie, really, really stick with you. I also think that, technically they are two different species, not just animals, but I also argue that, they're anything that's usually not, a human is technically like an animal or some type of alternate living being. And I think what's really fascinating about the relationship between Charlotte and Wilbur is that it almost, and I say almost, reflects real world sort of a symbiotic relationship, or a sort of parasite-host relationship. Now, in no way is Charlotte living off of Wilbur. In fact, she's actually doing more for him than he's for her. But what a symbiotic relationship is that usually one creature lives amongst a host, and either it might add something to the extra creature, or it might just simply live inside. It's like, okay, yeah, sure, you can live inside me as long as you're not causing much damage or whatever. It's just as simple as that. And it almost does fall that way, except for the fact that she's not taking anything from Wilbur. She's just simply doing this because she cares about him, and it just, it's just a nice story, but it's very similar in that regards. If anything, Wilbur's almost the symbiotic one off of this. But it's very interesting how sometimes smaller creatures do latch onto or live around bigger creatures for one reason or another. I know that there's like a lot of little birds that actually follow around bigger creatures like elephants or rhinos, because when the rhino or the elephant steps into soft dirt or mud, they actually stir up bugs or small creatures that the birds can then eat. So the small birds simply will ride on top of these bigger creatures and will snag food whenever they get a chance to. It's very cool, actually. This is a really sweet story. It's really great for just two animals, sort of trusting each other. About how to trust a friend, how to, sort of, sometimes maybe stick your neck out, or sometimes to, trust someone in a situation you didn't think you'd actually be able to trust someone in. It's very, very sweet. It's a very sweet movie, much like The Fox and the Hound. It's a very good relationship. The main difference being that one pair grew up with each other, and the other pair sort of knew each other for a smaller period of time, but had such a huge impact. And that's honestly sometimes what is pretty good for friends. And these two are definitely great friends. Great friends who had such a long-lasting relationship, and it's honestly a good movie. I definitely go back and watch any chance I get. And animals, sometimes they can have that simple friendship with creatures that you wouldn't even expect. Like I already mentioned about some birds that hang around bigger creatures, or animals that should, technically be opposites still getting along for one reason or another. I've seen several creatures like that, and it's really, really cool when that kind of thing happens. As for spiders and animals, I always wonder, can spiders or can some creatures communicate with other creatures? How do they talk? It's always curious to me. And if I ever was able to communicate with a spider, the first thing I'd actually do, if it could, just to maybe spell something in a web for me, I would definitely do that. Of course, Wilbur's also friends with some of the other barnyard animals as well, but not to the same extent as Charlotte. Charlotte went out of her way to take care of Wilbur, and it was definitely a sweet, sweet budding friendship that unfortunately was cut too short. But as life can be, and a lot of animals sometimes might have that same situation. And there are plenty of other really fun animal buds out there as well. In the next upcoming segment, we're going to probably talk about a little more of a comedic duo, one I'm sure everybody knows about, and that's definitely going to be great to talk about because there's a lot to unpack with this duo, as well as I'm going to try as hard as I can to not simply talk all about Disney movies, but Disney does so well with their animal buds that I might have to go back a couple more times. But I'm going to try making sure that each one stands out and has something special about it. Don't worry. Just because it's a list about talking animals doesn't mean there isn't some substance to it. I promise that. As well, I also really want to talk about maybe some obscure ones you might not know as well. But that's definitely something we're going to get to in the next upcoming segment. Because when we come back, we're going to talk more about animal buds in movies and TV and just some interesting facts about them and just how to spend some time and go check them out. Until then, please stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
back. Thanks again for sticking in today. We're talking about best pet buddies, animal buddies in media, television, movies today. So we've talked about a Disney movie, Fox and the Hound. We've talked about Charlotte's Web and the really beautiful friendship that those two characters had. But now, let's talk about another really, really, really famous animal duo, probably two of the best buddies ever to grace the screen. That's right, we're going to talk about the paranoid meerkat and the gastrointestinal warthog, Timon and Pumbaa. Now, Timon and Pumbaa come from the Disney movie The Lion King. Very famous movie. I'm surprised you wouldn't know that. But if you didn't, Lion King is a movie about a young lion cub who was supposed to inherit a kingdom from his father. However, due to some inter-family shenanigans, Simba was framed for murder, and his evil uncle took over and ruined the entire kingdom. And with the help of two unlikely friends, Timon and Pumbaa, Simba, along with his young female best friend, Nala, help him realize he needs to be a king, and then he returns home and becomes king. That's a very rough summary of it, but that is where I'm going to stick with. But regardless, so Timon and Pumbaa are definitely a fascinating duo. With Timon and Pumbaa, you have the, age-old, duo of the bigger, not too smart, guy with a heart of gold, and the smaller, fast-talking, a little more cautious, possibly even rude, of the duo, and sort of the brains of the bunch. But with this, they actually have more of a friendly duo than a manipulative duo. And what's great about them is that they sort of complement each other well, and if you've ever seen sort of the half-sequel Lion King 1.5, it sort of expands on these two, and sort of the life they lived, how they were sort of outcast from where they belonged, and so they sort of become outcasts together. And this works really well for the characters because Pumbaa never really belonged with his own people, and Timon was always a bit more adventurous than most meerkats. So they sort of are able to parallel, to watch over each other, to help keep each other in check, and it works really well for these two, up to the point where even they take in Simba as a cub and help him sort of mentor him in life, saying that, yeah, sometimes you don't really belong anywhere, you just gotta let that go and move on with your life. And it's because these two had that sort of older mentality to be able to sort of nurture Simba and sort of guide him and help him grow up, while at the same time even helping themselves grow up a little bit too. It's really fascinating. These two are probably some of the best buddies ever brought to animated cinema in animal form, simply because they just sort of work really well together. One has sort of an innocent, simple mind that sort of works and really cares for other people, and the other, while caring, also cares about survival and is able to have hindsight, which is really great for them. And in the real world, I don't believe that meerkats and warthogs, I'm not 100% on the ecology of meerkats and warthogs. I'm pretty certain that meerkats do live in the African savanna, or is it the African desert? Savannah? I'm gonna go savannah. And I don't know if warthogs live in the same environment, but given the accuracy of the movie, I'd say probably. Now, I don't know how often these two cross paths, but I can't imagine it would be very often. I don't believe warthogs are carnivorous, or very often carnivorous, so I'm pretty sure they wouldn't be enemies with a meerkat. So it's absolutely likely that they would actually be able to live in somewhat of a unified front. On top of this, it's also really, really good that, the interesting fact that they could put them together with lions. We had that talk about the I want to say it's a meerkat or a badger or something that scared lionesses, and they were just confused. Because the two animals aren't pitted for survival, they can usually live in harmony, pretty frequently, actually. It happens a lot more than you realize. People think that animals just automatically attack other animals, but in reality, if they don't need to fight, if they don't need to attack, they usually don't. And that's pretty cool in my opinion. With Timon and Pumbaa, they sort of have this long, expanding buddy friendship that expands so far, goes so long with them, that they just work really well. Usually Pumbaa's able to help ground Timon, and Timon's able to sort of help pull Pumbaa into situations he wouldn't usually be, which is always a really good dynamic, for better or worse, because it's two opposite forces working together, and just complementing each other really well. I also really love the pairings. I always love a bigger character and a smaller character paired together. It's always fun. And they're sort of like, no matter what, they're sort of got each other's back. Even if it seems like one usually has something over the other or something, they always seem to have each other's back, and they have very similar interests that they're able to sort of live and work together, that it just works out really well for them. Also, in the movie, typically Timon and Pumbaa eat bugs. Now, what's interesting about this is that since I do believe that meerkats are slightly omnivores, I think that they eat roots, but I think they also eat small insects as well. A lot of smaller mammals do tend to eat insects, or occasionally they're small things like that. And warthogs are, I'm pretty sure they're omnivores, because a lot of pigs are omnivores as well. Usually you can feed a pig anything and it'll eat it. So because a warthog is similar to the pig family, I think they are, but I don't think they exclusively eat meat, so eating bugs wouldn't be that far off either. What is far off is making a lion eat bugs, but it actually is kind of interesting that two creatures that might have a slightly more insected diet would actually be able to adapt a predator into an insect diet as well. So that's kind of an interesting way to look at it. A lot of mammals, bats, a lot of birds, and even a lot of small mammals do eat bugs. Very small mammals, but it's interesting how that when you really stop and think about it, that kind of does work. Now also, warthogs I'm pretty sure they can also eat grass. They can graze as well. So warthogs have a slightly wider diet. Meerkats have a slightly slimmer diet. I don't think they're very they don't eat herbivores very often, but they might eat a lot more insects. So that actually just kind of worked for their character in some weird ways. It's not just, they're eating bugs because they need to be able to eat something. No, it actually is slightly real. But these two work very well as buddies. Unlike, say, Todd and Copper, who have a friendship from young infantship to adulthood, just because they're innocent. Timon and Pumbaa are two outcast individuals who sort of work really well together. Their old lifestyles don't really care for them, but they're like, yeah, I kind of get you. Yeah, we're a lot alike. Let's just kind of live together because I think we would do well together. You watch my back, I watch your back. We're both kind of weirdos. And that sometimes is the best kind of relationship you can have between two characters, and I love it. It's very fun whenever we have animal buddies that can sometimes teach us friendship and can teach us interesting lessons through things like their differences, their odd habits and peculiar tendencies, and it just kind of reflects back on us. And I think that's great. I love it. I think it's honestly one of the best things. And if you can find some real world entomology behind it, that's even better. But with that being said, we're going to go on yet another quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about more animal buddies. I have a few interesting ones that you might not have even heard of yet. But you got to stick tuned for that. Please listen to these messages. We'll be right back.
Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
thanks for sticking around. We are back talking about best animal buddies and some of the best examples of them in television and media. So we've talked a lot about some Disney ones. We've talked about Timon and Pumbaa. We've talked about Todd and Copper. And we've also talked about Charlotte and Wilbur. And now I have another really interesting pairing I want to talk to you about. And these are very different than a lot of the other animal buddies we've talked about because these actually do not talk. Unlike most animated or even movie animals, they usually have some kind of talking role. But these guys actually don't talk. Instead, they are more animalistic, and most of their interactions are based off of actions and facial expressions. But from the hit animated series Avatar: The Last Airbender, we have two main animal companions. Appa, the large flying sky bison, and Momo, the sort of winged lemur. And the reason why these two creatures are so fascinating, for so many reasons I might add, is that these two are a lot of my favorite tropes and sort of complementing comparisons of animals, being one's bigger, one's smaller, one has a more slick personality and the other's more slow and simple. They have a lot of the same traits that, say, Timon and Pumbaa have, but they're still more animalistic and they're more action-based than word-based. Along with that, they're probably two of the most realistic animals on the list, despite the fact that these are both two mammals that should not fly. They both fly. But that's neither here nor there, because what I find interesting about these creatures is that they actually develop a relationship of companionship and friendship over the course of the series. And, it's noted just through some of the small actions they do. And we don't need them to be able to speak. We don't need them to be able to have a secret language or something. They just sort of understand each other like real animals do. So I've previously talked about how sometimes smaller creatures will latch on or around to bigger creatures for usually living reasons. You know, in the real world, there are a lot of creatures like small birds that'll actually ride on the back of hippos or rhinoceri or even alligators, and they'll usually stick around them because they do something for that big creature or because they're very unintrusive. For example, if they're riding on top of a rhinoceros or a elephant or a hippo, usually that big creature might walk around in an area, maybe like a small dirt or muddy area, and as they walk, they stir up the dirt, and it actually causes bugs to come to the surface, which allows the birds to go and eat. So it's a simple give and take. They live around the big creature, and in response, they get food. And they're not disturbing the big creature, so it's like, I don't care, they can do whatever they want. Well, at the same time, there are some animals, like birds, that'll actually live around bigger creatures, and they'll actually do things like eat insects or mites or things that fly on or around that creature. So in response, they just let them live there. It's like, yeah, you keep doing your thing, I'll keep doing my thing. Very simple. And in this case, Appa and Momo sort of have a relationship like that, where Appa was the companion of the main character, Aang, and he already had a friendship and companionship to Aang. Momo came along later on, and Aang kept him sort of as a new friend to go along. Momo, kind of like a flying squirrel, monkey, lemur sort of deal. Momo took a lot of food. He was kind of like a squirrely monkey, and he was pretty selfish for a lot of the beginning of the series. Throughout the rest of the series, he grew close to the other non-speaking character, Appa, the flying sky bison, and they sort of had a mutual understanding. Usually, if something happened, Momo was around Appa, and say if one ate, the other had a small portion of the food, or usually they sort of did things together in small amounts. And it was like, well, yeah, you're going to do all the big stuff, I'm going to do all the little stuff, and we're going to be fine. And they actually had a bit of friendship as well, because, small spoiler, but later in the middle of the series, Appa gets kidnapped, and Momo is clearly visibly upset by this, being very sad, reclusive, and whenever Appa finally comes back, Momo's happy and spends more time with Appa because they are friends and they live sort of off of each other, but they also have a bit of a connection without really needing to speak, as some animals actually do. There's been a lot of videos going up lately of things like cats and dogs getting along because of one reason or another. I saw this one really cute video of a small cat that I believe didn't like people, and the dog actually loved people. And the cat was actually left alone a lot. So the cat was abandoned, left alone, very young age. And what would happen was when they adopted the cat, they already had a dog, and they weren't very much friends at the beginning. But then after a little while, the cat started warming up to the dog and would actually start grooming the dog. And then it just became a thing where they just loved being around each other. When one got scared, the other one just kind of crawled on top and started petting and like licking the other one. And that's sometimes how it happens. When there's no need for two individual species to fight, they won't fight. They'll actually, if anything, get along better because they like don't have any problems. There's no issue. And sometimes creatures just work really well together because of that. It's really sweet how nice and how well animals can get along together without needing to be very similar. And these two are definitely really good friends. They do a lot for each other, they do a lot for the team, and they just go really well together as companions. And being best animal buds doesn't mean that you also have to be able to speak, make wisecracks, silly jokes, or have emotional dialogue. Sometimes it's just about the interactions and the sweet things that the characters do just because they're sweet characters. And that's honestly the best thing about them. There are a lot of great relationships in that series as well, and a lot of really unique animals that are very faithful to real world that I would highly recommend going to check out if you haven't seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, which I really don't know why you haven't seen it, but if you haven't, go check it out. You'll see some really interesting and unique animals. They actually do a really cool take on the Jesus lizard, which is one of the coolest lizards out there because it runs on water. And they do something really cool with that in an episode, and I thought that was really neat. And I'd highly recommend going to see that. But the relationships that they have aren't strictly limited to the people, but also to even the animals and the creatures. Which is why I think Appa and Momo are a really great case of best buds, because they just go really well together. But that's really, honestly, the best thing about any of these creatures on the list. Todd and Copper are really great because they can teach us about friendship. And, if two people are, good friends, there shouldn't be an issue with that. And being able to trust a friend. With Charlotte and Wilbur having the ability to, in a short time, make good friends and sort of put your trust in someone else. That's really an important message, being able to trust someone even if you don't know them, and sometimes the impact someone can have on your life in a small period of time. And Timon and Pumbaa, about how your differences, how your odd quirks, and the way you view the world can sometimes bring you your best friend, and sometimes being an outcast, being a bit different, can be a really good thing. And with Appa and Momo, being that animals can get along pretty well, and that it doesn't matter what you are. Sometimes you can have a great relationship with someone and it can really affect your life. And honestly, that's all it really needs to be sometimes. Sometimes a good relationship can really affect your life for better or worse. That's why sometimes animals just can convey a message sometimes better than people can. But with that being said, it's time for another quick break. But when we come back, we have another really cool, really fun group of animals to talk about some best buds and some interesting stories about them as well. So please, stay tuned. We'll be right back.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
sticking around. I'm so glad you guys are still here today. We're talking about best animal buddies in television, movie media, wherever. And we've already talked about a lot already. We've talked about Fox and the Hound. We talked about Timon and Pumbaa, Charlotte's Web, and a few others as well. And we have a few more for you in store today. So, I said I wanted to try avoiding simply talking about all the Disney animated and Disney characters, but there are so many of them that could take up a whole list of their own. And I thought kind of dedicating this whole section right here to a lot of the Disney best buddies, best pets, best animal friends that there are out there. And there are quite a lot you can think of. One major great example of a lot of animal pets that are best friends are the animals from Oliver and Company, specifically Oliver and Dodger, and how fascinating it is that, I've talked about how dogs and cats can get along, and they get along very frequently when they're raised well together and they don't really have any reason to be mad at each other. And this is a great example of a bunch of strays, a bunch of animals taking care of a little lost kitten. They have no reason to fight it. They have no reason to attack it. And because of this, they're watching over this little kitten like he's just a little lost kid. And it happens very frequently. A lot of times dogs and cats don't want to or don't need to fight. It's just instincts. But whenever more protective instincts kick in, a lot of times they'll take care of each other. And they'll do well. But in some cases, some animals just don't naturally get along together either. Sometimes a new creature moving in on their turf, moving in on their living space might sort of change up the dynamic, might add some aggression to the topic as well. Happens very frequently, and that's a lot of what happens in this movie. On top of that, there are a few others, such as the two animals from... a lot of duos of animals, say, you could say things like the two animals from The Princess and the Frog, and how they have a nice little dynamic between each other as well, being two Cajun-born animals from Bayou in New Orleans, to several others as well. We have the animals from Bolt, a hamster, a cat, and a dog, and how they become good friends and in essence a family over time, simply because they all sort of don't belong, or they all have something wrong with them that makes them sort of work well together. And that's sort of what's fun about them too. I'm always a fan of misfits. You could almost say Rocket and Groot from the Marvel movies, but that's really stretching it. But I will say that they have a really nice friendship dynamic that I like as well. And Rocket technically isn't a raccoon, but I'm just going to say he is for right now, and Groot's more or less a plant, but they still have a very similar dynamic that I wanted to address anyway. There are many, many others as well. Sometimes you'll have even ones like, say, you might have Abu and Iago, or you might have, several other animals that just sort of Disney plays this duality of animal creatures together and makes really good friendships out of them as well. I do actually believe the Homeward Bound movies are Disney as well. If not, I'm just going to kind of put them under there as well, because that's one of the biggest examples of talking animals as friends, sort of coming together, and a very, very touching and sad story as well. If you don't know much about that movie, three animals who can talk to each other. They live with their young boy owner, and I think during a move, the animals get left behind or they get lost in the moving process, and they need to find their way back home. And they have a cat, I believe a cat and two dogs, and the oldest dog, who's a golden retriever, she's kind of leading their way. You also have sort of like the young spunky one and the more sort of negative one, but they all sort of make it home in the end. But they almost believe that the oldest dog didn't make it, but then last minute the oldest dog made it. And it's very, very sad, but it's also very happy. How these creatures work together to make it to their destination, which happens a lot in real life too. Sometimes animals just immediately start working with each other for survival. They won't leave another to die if they can survive, and they usually work together even if they are different to achieve their goal. And it's very interesting. It's very relatable, and I get it. Along with that, we also have a few others as well. I think the 101 Dalmatians are definitely an interesting one as well. However, they don't really talk or anything like that, but they are cute animals who are more or less somewhat siblings. Some are siblings and some aren't, and they just sort of come together to face a greater evil, and they manage to do just that. Very great, always great. And also, I think a really fun one, if we talk more specifically about, I guess, buds, but if we're just going straight up out for Disney, I think Mickey, Donald, and Goofy always make a really great, best bud trio. They have a lot of the same things I always talk about, but they also sort of have a goofy, fun dynamic as well. I'm not going to linger on them too much because they are more cartoons and characters than they are of animals, but I do still think that Disney has a pretty good mindset when it comes to animal buddies and a lot of their dynamics. And if you stuck around this long, definitely consider commenting what some of your favorite animal companions are, best animal pairings and duos, and maybe give us more ideas because we might have some more to talk about in the future as well. But I want to go back and talk about, say, Oliver and Company and a couple other those movies for a minute there. What I love about the Oliver and Company sort of dynamic is that while it can play off as if you took them and made them humans, they would work the same way. But what's fun about them is that it can possibly happen that dogs can take care of a cat, or cats can take care of a dog. It happens a lot more than you realize because sometimes animals just need to survive, and other animals will help take on that role if they can, or if they need to, or if they, they usually will. There have been times whenever cats have been taken in by dogs, and that cat just lives with them happily because they took them in and he gave them everything they needed. Same thing vice versa. Some dogs get taken in by cats. It's not weird, it's not unnatural since they're so similar and become so domesticated. That's absolutely possible for them to survive and live copacetically. And the only reason they'd even fight is if there has been, if dogs or cats have been trained or have been previously confronted by a dog or a cat and makes them more agitated. So in reality, if there is no issue, usually they can live just fine if they're introduced very well too, which this movie sort of exemplifies that a lonely kitten can be taken in by some dogs and can absolutely be fine if they were for need of survival, which this kind of came down to. Although it's not exactly a Disney movie, I do still want to talk about the movie All Dogs Go to Heaven, which I think is a pretty good example of some interesting dynamics between two animals of the same type of species, having that sort of bigger, smaller dynamic, the simple versus the complex. And I do love the dynamic they have. It's sort of in a similar Oliver and Company fashion. But what's interesting about these two characters is that one doesn't exactly have the best interest in heart for the other one and just sort of takes advantage. But that sort of also doesn't mean he doesn't care, especially when it's needed. And between these characters, I think it's great having animals that don't always do the right thing either. It doesn't mean animals do wrong things, but they don't always do the right thing either. Some animals will take food when they can find it. Some animals will be a little mischievous if they're smart enough, and they can be. But also some animals are just as capable of being just as big and nice-hearted as well, which these two main characters in All Dogs Go to Heaven actually do exemplify. Animals can be just as complex as humans, but they also can be just as simple as animals. But either way, they sometimes can give us an interesting story, or if not a better story than people could ever tell as well, which definitely always, it's definitely something to look into. And I think that a lot of these animals, animated talking animals, definitely hit that stride very well when they come from Disney. But with that being said, it's time to go on another quick break. But when we come back, we'll have a few more animals to tie this all up in, a special honorable mention, and then we'll make sure that we wrap this thing up in a nice little bow. Until then, please stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Hello, I am so glad you decided to take the day to spend some time and listen to me talk about animals and a lot of goofy things, but even still, I love talking about animals, and I love that you're here today. We've been talking about best animal buddies in movies, best friends, animals that work well together. We've talked about a lot of them today, but we have just a little bit more to wrap up. So while we have been talking about animals that are best buddies in movies, I feel it's wrong not to talk about some animals that are best buddies with, non-animals, and how they just show the fact that they are best buddies all around. So I have quite a few examples that I just kind of want to talk about. I'll also talk a little bit about that animal itself and what makes them so special, what's so great about them, and just a lot of likes like that. First off, let's talk about some of the best buddy animal dogs, the best pet dog buddies. And there's a lot of examples, if you want to name one of the most famous ones, you have Scooby-Doo, Snoopy, you have, say, Rush from Mega Man, you have a lot of dog examples. It's very easy. Air Bud, a lot of really good dog examples. But what makes a lot of these great, you have Scooby-Doo, he's a talking dog, he helps them solve mysteries. He's a Great Dane, so he's a very big dog. If you just needed a big dog to be around to help you out, to sort of be a little intimidating, Scooby-Doo should be intimidating, but he's not. He's a big old scaredy cat. But he's useful when need be. He helps him solve clues, keeps an eye out, and he's very useful. And to also a somewhat similar extent, Courage from Courage the Cowardly Dog is very similar. They're both scaredy cats, but they also love the people that they're, close with, Shaggy, Muriel, and a lot of the friends as well. And he'll do what it takes to help them. Snoopy, not exactly a talking dog, but, a good dog sidekick to Charlie Brown and to, also Woodstock as well. And they also are a pair of good buddies as well. Sort of just playing off of each other, being silly, nonsensical, laughing at each other's expense, but also helping each other up as well, which is really great. And also, again, dogs and other species can get along, and it's not unheard of for a dog and a bird to be friends. I've seen it myself, and it's really adorable. And then you have some other animals as well. You have animals that are friends, animals that sort of have an understanding. If you've ever seen a movie where there's like a sort of lone wolf character or a wild animal, say, for example, John Wick with his dog, or, the movie Revenant, you have the dog that went alongside Leonardo DiCaprio's character as well. You have a lot of fun animal companions that sort of add more to the main character or are a good friend, which is always really great. Animal companions are great. You also have, say, like more animal companions, ride-along companions. You have like chocobos from Final Fantasy. Sometimes you might also have a few other types of riding creatures that sort of act as a friend as you spend more time with them. That's also one thing. Time is really important when it comes to pets and animals. Which is always a beautiful thing with any type of story, is the sort of friendship that the two can make over time. A lot of cowboy movies, there have been some where about the main character gets attached to like his horse. I don't remember the name of the movie off the top of my head, but that was actually a really famous one as well. also thinking like saying the Never-Ending Story has both a horse and a dragon, which is always a great companionship as well. So seeing those kind of relationships bloom between that, it's really great. Because a lot of times these animal friends are sometimes the best friend, or only friend to, the main character. You know, you think about like Abu and, Aladdin. You know, one's not an animal, but they both are good friends, best friends, because, you know, they spend time together and they grow this really good relationship of understanding. But there's also a large one that I haven't talked about yet, and this is more along the lines of collectible pets. Pokemon, Digimon, etc. And I know I talk a lot about Digimon on this show whenever I get the chance to, or Pokemon. I talk a lot about Pokemon, just because it's fun, it's an interesting concept. I love the idea behind it and how much real world relation there is. And I might as well talk a little bit about it now, but we have like Ash and Pikachu. You also have like Team Rocket and Meowth. You have a lot of times trainers with their best friend, a Pokemon they've raised since they were small that they've been on their whole journey with. And it's important, and why I really enjoy that series is because it sort of encourages growth and connection between a person and their Pokemon, or in this case, think about a person and their pet. You know, if you've ever had a pet for any period of time, after a while you sort of move from, okay, this is my pet, you do what I say, to you're my buddy, and we have this unspoken bond. We have a connection that that we just understand each other really well. And I also think that if you want to talk about friends as Pokemon, Pikachu's made friends with a lot of different Pokemon over the years. And some that they're still good friends with, you know, and I think that's a pretty important notion of the series, is that you can make friends with anyone, and even if you don't see each other for long periods of time, or even if you just met, you can easily become friends with someone if you just are open to it and you're willing to be a friend back, which is a pretty good, message the show tries to tell, is that, you know, sometimes things may start off rocky and rough. Sometimes you may not have even been friends. You may have been enemies. You may have been fighting. But after an understanding has been reached, after some time has passed, you might be able to truly be friends if given the chance, and if you really just look at it from a different perspective, which is really a good story about Pokemon. I definitely think, like, you know, the story of Mewtwo is a good example of how, you know, an animal-like creature doesn't trust people, but by listening to another creature, another animal, it's come to understand people a bit more. That sometimes you have to be able to open yourself up to be able to be friends. And, you know, there may be millions of other creatures in Pokemon just like you, but you can be different. And you also may never meet all the same people, but you can still be friends. And it's really fascinating to get to see if you take the time. It may be a kid's show, but it still does have some pretty good stories and some good ideas about things like failure, friendship, about never giving up. It's really, really good if you look into it enough. Because that's just sometimes the beauty of animation and television, is that sometimes it can just tell you a story you didn't even think you needed to hear. But once you hear it, it's like, wow, that's what I was looking for. It's also about companionship and sticking through the tough times as well. A lot of creatures will sort of exemplify that, will sort of, you know, be able to stick it through, be able to take you on an adventure and, you know, bear through the toughest times as well as the fun times, which definitely is a great example of that. You know, there's a lot of examples in these animations and in these series that I could just go on and on about, and how amazing a lot of animals can be, a lot of great companions, a lot of great, you know, unique examples, but I don't have that much time to keep talking. Instead, I'll probably have to save more for another episode. But yeah, we've gotten a lot of time to talk about, you know, best buddies. Copper and Todd are really good examples. Charlotte and Wilbur, you know, looking back on it, that's a really pure friendship there that I'm glad I got to experience. Timon and Pumbaa, a hilarious duo that, you know, shows that you can be weird, you can be different from everyone else, but sometimes there's someone just as weird and as different as you. Animals like Appa and Momo show that, you know, in real ways, you don't have to be big and complex to just be good friends. Sometimes it just takes a mutual understanding and just being around each other enough to be good friends. And that's honestly something that I can highly respect about the series and about these two animals. If you haven't seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, go see it and go watch these two beautiful creatures. because that's just how amazing of a show it is, and that's just how amazing of animals they are as well, and how pretty realistic it is as well. But with that being said, I'd like to thank you all once again for tuning in to the GSMC Pets Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. If you like what you heard today, maybe you can consider subscribing to our podcast to catch up on the latest, as well as giving us a like. It helps out. And if you really want to help us out, maybe give us a comment. Tell us who your favorite pet buddies are, any animal relationships you really like. On top of that, if you really want to stay in touch with us, consider following us on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Some of the best ways to keep in touch with us. And until next time, like always, thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.
You've been listening to the GSMC Pets Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's podcast.